Hey there, and welcome to the third episode of Work Dope, a podcast about the messiness and the potential of humans at work. I'm Linda Stacy, and I'm a corporate sellout turned corporate innovator who thinks that working in corporate America doesn't have to suck. Admittedly, it often does. By some stats, up to about 80% of the workforce is unsatisfied with work. And on the flip, the paradox of that is that more and more humans are expecting to find the meaning and purpose within their lives at work. We're basing our identity on these roles, and with the pandemic and the Great Recession, this has all forced us to take a look at the quality of life within this workspace and what culture really means for people inside of organizations. To be real, to be fair, I do think business is cool. I think that building things, creating things, solving problems is one of the best ways that human potential can be realized, the best ways to manifest what it is really to be human in all of the best possible ways. A couple of things about this recording. We get into another tenet of self-leadership, or rather dope work, and that is self-management. This one is around productivity, and sometimes this can kind of bring people down because they realize that maybe they have to do a little work to get a little bit more work done. But believe me, I promise it's worth it. This is all about managing well within VUCA environments. And by VUCA, I mean volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I did not coin this acronym. It's used quite a bit when talking about today's busy corporate environments. Don't take your biological needs for granted. We're going to talk about that. We're going to be talking about all of the things, but just pick one or two if you actually do decide to try to make a change. At the end or in the middle, I invite you to ask me for a calendar tool. If you would like it, you can email me at linda@workdopepod.com. That's work, DOPEPOD.com. There's a tiny bit of swearing, so if you have kids around or you don't want to hear it, you have been forewarned. Enjoy the podcast. Hi there, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Linda Stacy, and this is Work Dope. Today, we're going to talk all about hacking your way to a more seamless day, a more on top of things day, a day where you feel like you are in the seat of control. So this is productivity for VUCA environments. I talked about VUCA in the last episode. We talked about volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environments. So everyone is distracted this way. Everyone has chaos in their work life. How do you get through this? How do you feel in the seat of control when you don't know when anything could happen, when there could be a curveball, when things just go completely shit show? So this is one of three tenets of self-leadership, this productivity and hacking your way to a more seamless, in-control day. Again, the three tenets of self-leadership are self-management. That's this one, self-management / productivity, and then self-awareness and relational awareness. And in the last episode, we talked more about self-awareness. I'm going to use my own crazy background as an example in this. I had zero skills, I feel like, when it came to organizing a productive day in these types of environments. I'm doing this in order to keep it somewhat entertaining and also just to show you like a zero to not zero type of approach to things. I get feedback these days that, people think that I am extremely organized. They think that I get a ton done, and I do get a lot done. And there's a lot of things I'm always focused on in terms of what I don't get done, but the amount of chaos and overwhelm that I have felt through most of my life doesn't really reflect what is showing up on the outside. So it's great to be able to give these things to other people too. So again, I want to keep this entertaining because, to be honest, when I teach this in live sessions and workshops, I often feel and see people's energy just drop when I begin to describe ways to put things in the tank, to design your week at the beginning of the week, to think things through at the top. People, feel like they're doing so much already and they don't want to have to put in more effort. But this is really about trying to get through the day with having done no planning versus the opposite. So some amount of planning and forethought and giving some mind around alignment towards who you want to be when you show up and when you want to accomplish in a given week. All of these are really important in terms of just feeling less drained. So there's going to be energy either way. And there are actions that are, or activities that, there's There's the thrust versus the opposite of that. I'm not thinking of it right now. It'll come to me at some point. But when, an airplane is thrust versus drag, both are energy. And do you want there to be a drag, and that might be what you're experiencing now. It's certainly what I was experiencing for many, many years. Or do you want to actually put yourself in a position where you're actually got a little bit of lift that you can work from and keep yourself more like an energized get your flywheel going type of thing. This is all for empowerment and ownership and you having more successful experience of your day. And that is success on your terms, whatever you identify as success. Maybe you don't know what success is, and that is probably too something that we'll talk about more and more. We talked about it in the last episode a little bit. All of this points towards freedom and just having a more free experience within days that can sometimes feel really confined. I'm going to say it, I've felt like I've been in prison sometimes when I'm at work because just feeling like I had a lack of agency or control over anything. And I want to bring the opposite because it doesn't have to be like that. And there are many good things that can come from a corporate experience. I'm also creating this episode basically so that I can refer back to it. Again, because it's one of these principles, these foundations to self-leadership. And I kind of hate the phrase self-leadership. I really kind of want to say, like dope work. How do you be a dope worker? I want to be able to point to this again and again so that folks know where there are tools to engage differently, because I don't think that we all get these tools and tips when we start out. I think executives expect that if you've made it through college and you're applying to corporate jobs, that you already have this stuff under your belt, but nobody has the basics when it comes to operating in a VUCA corporate environment before they got to the VUCA corporate environment. No one's born that way. You don't automatically know what to do when you arrive on day one or how to proceed. And hopefully it's not as chaotic when you first get there, but it's certainly going to build, and you don't automatically have these skills. There were times when I would be at networking events, and whenever I got the opportunity to actually to speak to someone who had previously been in an executive role or a higher person in an organization, and I would ask about productivity, it was really like a non-thing for them. They just assumed that their people had this. It was kind of like if they're in this role, that's part and parcel. They already do this. It's not always true. Some people are kind of operating very inefficiently. So these are ways to maybe get going and execute more efficiently. Because it's assumed that folks have this, it's very rarely part of an L&D curriculum. Not always. I do feel that there are some people who get productivity, time management, basics in some kind of educational format. And of course, there are books, and that's definitely how I changed my life. But by and large, most people I know do not get this as any kind of formalized corporate training. I've also had feedback over the years when I've done workshops, other things, that people say that some of these things are obvious, or they liked being reminded of the basics or things like this. And it's awesome that it was a reminder for them. Again, this was never formally taught to me, and there have got to be lots of other people in the population for whom these things were never taught. Again, lots of books out there, but they're not always directed towards people, like I said in another episode, on the front lines, or, people just kind of individual contributors. Oftentimes, these books are focused around executives or entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and that type of thing. So, and when I go to entrepreneurial type of events, there is more of a focus on getting a lot done and being productive and being highly, highly organized in the way one executes their week and their day. I think that these people are motivated and they're trying to get a ton done, and a lot of them don't have the skills already. And I would argue that a lot of individual contributors, you are essentially a solopreneur. You may as well behave like that within your environment. You'll probably do really well if you come across with that type of attitude and mindset. Again, no one has the experience of being in VUCA corporate until they are. So going back to my background, going from zero to not zero when it comes to what I'm able to get done and how I execute a given week, admitting that not everything gets done. Regularly, not everything gets done. I moved from California to Massachusetts at the age of 26. And the reason that I bring this up is that I lived in a part of the country where you didn't have to think about weather at all, really. I owned one coat most of my life until I moved to the east. And now I have so many coats, it makes me crazy because I don't know where to store them, but all the different variations for the type of outerwear that you need depending on your activity and the actual temperature and the elements and all of those things. It's crazy. And when I was in elementary school, I was quote unquote lucky that I had the one coat that was like the Catholic uniform navy blue windbreaker. It was the ugliest thing, and it was the only thing. So like on Easter Sunday, when sometimes it would be kind of cold out, and not by New England standards by any means, but I'd have a sundress or something I'd be excited to wear, and it would be cold. So I didn't want to only, wear the sundress, and the option was to put this ugly navy blue windbreaker over it. So just to kind of spell out some of the differences between East and West Coast. So when I started commuting in a way that required me to be outside, it took me way too long to kind of gear up. The right coats, the right shoes, understanding that walking in cobblestone in Boston for 7/10 of a mile and a half one way, it's not a terribly long way, but when it's really cold, when it's really windy, when you don't have the right footwear, it just is extremely, extremely not good. So to anyone, I would say, if you have to be outside, and I know most of the country does not have to be outside, you get to drive in your cars and just kind of arrive in a parking lot, maybe have a very short walk till you get into your building. But if you do have to be outside, please do yourself a favor and consider these things and get geared up. I also didn't buy a lot of gear then because I didn't have a lot of financial resource, and I felt like it was irresponsible for me. And if I had to go back and give advice to 26-year-old Linda or 28-year-old Linda or 34-year-old Linda, I would have said, buy the gloves, buy the shoes, buy the boots, buy the snow boots that you can actually walk in, all of these things, buy the rain boots, just do it, make the investment and be, like 1,000 times more comfortable. So this is one element of setting yourself up for success, is the biological needs. They are foundational. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he starts with biology. And that's where I am starting. Get yourself set up. I also feel like having your clothing ready in advance is a huge gift to yourself. Having the proper clothing, having, especially for women, having maybe tried on an outfit before you get somewhere. And I realize now more and more people are not going into an office, but I would guess that you're going in sometimes. I'm going in 2 days a week right now. And actually, because it's almost harder to get the flywheel going when it comes to this, because we're not doing it as frequently and we haven't done it for so long that we're out of practice. So do yourself a favor and at least think it through. Think through what you're going to wear, think through what the weather is going to be and how you can set yourself up for that goodness. I used to, when I first moved in with my husband in Ipswich, which was the now much longer commute, which I referenced in the first episode, I would never give myself enough time. I was totally frantic. I was looking for outfits while my husband was sleeping still, which I was resentful of the fact that he was sleeping while I was putting outfits together. So maybe that's why I wasn't doing it the night before. But when I did get to a point when I was actually thinking and doing these things in advance, it did change my life. Spending 5 or 10 minutes doing it the night before was a gift to Linda. I was putting money in the bank for future Linda. All of this is for your own success. My nickname growing up as a little girl was, Lazy Linda. And there's something definitely behind that. And I think a lot of humans kind of have a leaning towards, isn't it nice to just relax and kick back? Maybe not all. There's certain people who can't seem to sit still, but I definitely look forward to the times where I can chill and do very little. But I also don't like being frantic all of the time. So taking 10 minutes out of my evening routine to get myself set up is a good thing. So those old mornings years ago, totally frantic, totally not enough time, and then I wouldn't eat anything and getting up before 6, probably not getting into the office until 8:30 or 8:45 and having all of that anxiety and like adrenaline or cortisol, I don't know, all of the things pumping through you, all the stress hormones. I was exhausted by the time I got to work. Of course, probably hadn't slept well enough either. And I just was arriving already at a deficit. And I anything that you can do to arrive so that you are not at a deficit, so you're at least even, is the way to go. Things shifted for me a lot over the years. There are a lot of things you can do. You can have a banana, you can have an apple. So if you have a lot of time between the time that you wake up and the time you actually get to the office, and you know that you're going to be hangry, give yourself the benefit of some kind of food, even if you don't really want to have breakfast. I often didn't want to eat at, 6:15, and it would have been too early anyway, considering the amount of time before the next meal. But the times when I started putting a banana in the car, or when just having coffee prepared, all of these things changed my life. Get yourself a thermos that you can turn upside down and it's not going to leak. If you're on public transportation, again, I realize there's only a small portion probably of potential listeners who have these kinds of limits around what taking to public transportation requires, so that you end up getting at work not as flippin', hangry. If you are driving, I also have that experience. There were times when I drove long commutes in California, 90 minutes or more one way in traffic, which was also no good. You're going to have your coffee, you're going to have your snack, right? And thank God these days we actually have things that you can listen to that are much more enriching. You can listen to an audiobook, you can listen to a podcast. Back in the day, you had to potentially listen to, I'm not a huge fan of most, disc jockeys and their banter. It would actually kind of stressed me out in the morning. I was totally not interested. Or news. Those were kind of the options. I just feel like our options these days are so much different to have a transformed commute. My commute also did change when I discovered podcasts, and was then listening to those on my walk from the train to the office, which again, about 0.7 of a mile, 15 to 20 minute walk. And that it totally changed my experience at that time. It actually made it something that I looked forward to. So these are all things that kind of kept me up and kept me in a much better place when I actually got to work. Think of your biological needs. Do you need to eat? Do you need to prepare your clothing so that you're not enhancing those stress hormones and making yourself crazy by that before your day even begins? I would arrive, I'd be ticked off, hangry, all of these things, not really excited to see anyone. This is an environment for many years where I haven't really felt like I vibed with people like I did when I work in other types of environments, when I was in academic environments, even restaurants. I just felt like I just vibed with people different. I just felt like my personality could be more of what it wanted to be. And I didn't have to sound so fucking smart all the time, or like I knew all of the answers, like I feel sometimes like I do in my current corporate environment. So that added to kind of a negative mindset, right? So I had minimal skills to keep me from overwhelm. I had minimal skills even to keep me from my biological needs being met. And there was one year in particular where it just got nutso. We lost 40% of the staff within a few weeks. And this was around the time when I began to really seek out some tools to improve and change the way that I approached my work life. My advice overall is don't not do these things for yourself, right? No job should suck so bad. And there are always ways to take the reins. I'm going to describe a lot of things. Do not attempt to do everything that I describe. That is absolutely not what I'm suggesting. So don't assume that I'm suggesting that you should do all of the things that I describe as I begin to go through these things. I would say pick one or two things that you might like to change or enhance or tweak or something, and stay with it for at least 10 days. I'll say that again at the end, but for any new thing, new habit, anything new that you're trying, it takes a few days just to get kind of the bugs out, and it doesn't feel right or feel good in the beginning. I especially feel this way when I'm trying a new eating regimen or a new exercise regimen. It just sucks. Like day 3, day 4, day 5. It's usually until day 6, 7, or 8 where it starts to feel better. You need to give yourself some time to actually feel the positive benefit of whatever new thing that you're trying. It's just icky in the beginning. There's a lot of dissonance. If you don't identify with anything that I'm describing here, if this is like totally like left field, like what is it that you're doing? What are you trying to help people with? Either you're in denial, or you might be really harsh with people around you that lack these skills. You might have them intrinsically, so you don't really get why other people struggle with what could seem to be basics. And like I described in the last episode, some people have just really good modeling, or their background, or, just the determinants mean that they are able to see something and figure out how to take initial steps and stay on top of it. And others really need to see how it's done well by someone else and then tweak it and be kind of given the opportunity to copy and mirror and then tweak on their own. So once you've got all of your biological needs sorted out, really think about how you can set yourself up, in advance from the beginning in terms of your bio. Another key thing is just looking at the calendar, right? And when I first started in my corporate career, we hardly used the calendar. I know that the executives used the calendars because they had so many meetings and travel schedules and such that they needed to stay quite on top of it. But we barely even used electronic calendars when I first started. And I think too that perhaps people, when they're first in their career, there might not be as much on the calendar. So maybe you're not looking at it, or you're not knowing that it's a thing that you need to be paying attention to as much. I know I've been much more intentional with new hires and such to kind of tell them how to use their calendar and respond to things, and, not just leave things hanging, but to actually RSVP or, say that you're going to something or not going to something. But it's really important to take a look at the calendar. And I advise that people do it, look at the entire week, at the beginning of the week, or maybe at the end of the previous week. Just kind of see what's there. So many people, their weekend starts to become something different at midday on Sunday. Like this dread can start to overcome them because, the workday is coming and all potential unknowns and on and on. I find that if on Friday or on Thursday, I've actually looked ahead at the calendar, my experience of the weekend is much different. So again, putting things in the bank, depositing positive things for Linda to have a good experience over the weekend by spending 10 minutes or so the prior week. So look at the calendar, just be sure, this thing is coming up on Wednesday. I need to be sure that I'm addressing X and such on Monday so that I'm ready for it on Wednesday, or, whatever those things are. You're just kind of mapping it out in some way. And I actually take things from the electronic calendar and then put them into a paper calendar. I use a calendar called the Planner Pad, and I order them from the Planner Pad company every year. And I just like being able to put in the things that are actually, the calendars, the appointments, the things too that sometimes we forget to put in the calendar are commute times or getting ready times, preparation times. You can also begin to block times when you don't want to be interrupted. I'm hoping that that's becoming more and more of a thing when people are actually blocking work time so that they can't, so that meetings won't get scheduled during that time. So use a calendar, look at it in advance. Also look at it every day in advance of the next day. So I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Another thing I like to do is have a notebook or actual paper somewhere. If you can do this on your computer, it's fine. But I think on one sheet, literally a piece of paper, I like to be able to have the main tasks or projects that I'm working on, especially again in these varied work environments. If you only have one project that only has one work stream, hallelujah, good for you. Most of us have a lot of different things moving at one time. And for me, I like being able to just look at it, like it stays at the same place on my desk. If I have to navigate to some window on my computer, that tends to distract me. I can almost forget what I wanted to make a note of or what I wanted to refer to in the time that I'm trying to figure out which tab to go to or which application to go to. So I like just having one solid sheet of paper. And sometimes I will have sections of it with different lists in those sections. So if there are projects that I'm trying to work through over the given week, they might be in one section. If there are things I need to address today, they might be in another section. And then oftentimes when I'm working, things will occur to me that have nothing to do with work, things that have to do with the household or something I need to tell my husband. And I often will have a little section over on the side that says HH for me, which means household. And it's just a place where I can put it. So it's outside of my brain. Our brains have the capacity to hang on to about 7 things simultaneously. And most of us have more than 7 things going on at once. And part of overwhelm is trying to keep all of those things in our brain and know where to execute on the next point from moment to moment. Just don't do that to yourself. Use your brain power when you're actually mapping something out, when you're road mapping, when you're brainstorming, when you're deeply working in a project. Don't try to use your brain power to remember all of the things that you're responsible for, right? Also on that piece of paper, I will have a section for maintenance or things that maybe I just want to be sure to get done by the end of the day. There are administrative tasks in my role, and I've got to think that they're in other people's roles too. I need to log certain types of like transactional things that happen. I don't have to do them in the moment. I find that it's a little bit of a lag for me to try to do that type of work right in the sequence of the other types of work that I'm doing. So if I can put that in a little section that says maintenance so that I don't forget to do it, it kind of needs to be done by the end of the day or the beginning of the next day. I like having that kind of separated out too. So how does this actually look when you're working? You might have a call at some point during the day. And when you finish that call, you might know exactly where to dip back into work. You might not. You might just need to go ahead and look at that sheet and say, so what's the main project that I'm working on? What's the main thing I'm moving forward? I like being able to have it there and to be able to quickly dive into something when I've been distracted by something just prior to it. And the distraction, quote unquote, would be either the meeting or someone wants to chat right now or whatever that thing is. I want to be able to get back to deep work quickly and not have to scrounge for what was it that I was doing prior to the call. Having these things written down really helps. Or at the beginning of the day, scanning the entire thing. You kind of get a sense, what the priorities are. If you don't know what the priorities are and you are doing this kind of work, that's a good thing to talk to a coworker or a mentor or someone a colleague who's further along on the team or your boss. Absolutely. But usually I find that most people, once they kind of map things out, they get things out of their head, they begin to automatically see what needs to happen first. Usually there's a deadline or something's going to take longer, at least to get it started, that type of thing. And a note about projects overall. I've worked with some people over the years who resist things that kind of feel nebulous. I think most of us resist things that are nebulous. It's one of the key reasons for procrastination is a project just seems really big and we don't even know where to get started. And often we know at least the first step. We often know the first step. The first step might just even be schedule 10 minutes to brainstorm how I'm going to approach this. And once you actually give that attention to it, you'll begin to figure out what the first few steps are. If you are ever, in this situation where you're doing something that really feels unknown, you're doing it for the first time, you're not really sure, you just have to lay out some initial steps, and usually the next steps become more and more clear as you go. And hopefully you have some sense of what the destination is supposed to look like, but it might change a little bit along the way. I think it's important to have a routine at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. You can decide what it looks like, but for me, at minimum, having my coffee, having a look at the calendar, before I open email, those two things can set me up better for success than if I just dive right in. I don't think there is a morning anymore when these things happen before coffee, but you decide. And there are times when I'm sure to get in a walk before the day starts when I can. You just set it out for yourself. If you can do 2 or 3 things to set yourself up for success before the workday begins and or before you open email, before you get into that reactionary state, you'll be in such a better place. An end of day routine is nice too. I read something once, and I'm going to have to find it, where a gentleman was using this analogy almost of or metaphor of emptying your pockets when you come home at the end of the day. Just kind of going through where you've been today, what you did today, and where it makes sense to get started or to look tomorrow. It's just nice to have some kind of end of day moment to reflect or to look over that piece of paper that I just talked about, or to look at the calendar and set yourself up, and to acknowledge the great work that you've done or the progress that you've made, the things that you've created and produced, and the ways that you've grown, ways that you have been challenged, because challenge is there always for us to move through and to move past and to evolve and to elevate. One more tool that I like to use, and that's the Pomodoro. This is a timing technique. It's called the Pomodoro because there was a gentleman in Italy in the 80s. He was a college student, and he used a kitchen timer that was shaped like a tomato, a Pomodoro. And he would set it for 25-minute increments, and he would focus very, very, very dedicated way. He would focus on his studies for 25-minute increments and not allow himself to be distracted by anything. And if you think of this now, he didn't have a phone beeping at him or, computer applications or Facebook or any other social media to distract him at the time. But it was still an issue. As humans, we are distracted. It's part of our biology. It actually was good for us because it kept us from predators when we were, again, hunter-gatherer out on the savannah or something like that. So we are distracted by nature. We look for distraction. He would focus for 25 minutes. He would take a break for 5 minutes, and then he would re-engage for 25 minutes. And he would do 3 rounds of this. So essentially 90 minutes of work, but with 2 5-minute breaks in there. At the end of the 3 Pomodoros, he would take a 30-minute break. And this just became an extremely effective way to get into work. I have used it a lot through my career and through my entrepreneurial endeavors. When something is really important to me, but I don't have the mindset or the energy I just don't even want to get started. I'm feeling procrastination. I find that if I set a timer, I can do it. I can get through it. I'm like, you know what? I can at least do 25 minutes. And usually by 8 or 10 minutes, I'm in it. I've completely transformed. I'm now, especially because I'm not letting myself get distracted. I'm staying with it and I'm doing okay. I've heard from folks, and I've done this myself too, that sometimes you're in it, you've got the 25-minute going, and you forget that you have the 25-minute going. You're distracted anyway, and then the timer goes off, and then you lambast yourself for having gone off and gotten distracted anyway. It's okay. Have some compassion for yourself. It's hard to do new things. One suggestion, there is something out there called a time timer. You can look it up. It's an actual clock that you could put somewhere in your field of vision that has a big red section for the 25 minutes. And basically that red section gets smaller and smaller as time goes on, so that you can actually kind of see somewhere in your visual field that the time is going down. And it might be a reminder to you that you are actually trying to focus for those 25 minutes. Again, hugely effective in getting things done. And now, as I'm working on this podcast and it's becoming more important for me and I need to be more intentional about it because of the time that it takes, I'm using the timing techniques more and more. Sometimes I'm I don't have time to work on the podcast. That's, one of these very nebulous big things. But I do have 25 minutes to work on the intro, work on the outro, work on the edits. Being as specific as you can with the items on your list can really, really help get you past procrastination. Again, trying to stay away from quote unquote work on podcast and really think about what are the specific things I can do. This goes for me with anything, cleaning the house. If I keep it to cleaning the house and I know that I don't have whatever amount of time I think that's going to be, some huge amount of time. But I said, you know what? I have an hour. I could do 25 minutes, and what am I going to do during the, I'll focus on the kitchen, these 3 things. I'll focus on the toilets, whatever, you pick it and then you do it. And man, it just feels so much different than if you're I got to clean the house. And that feels so big and it's going to take your whole day and it's just going to suck. So there are a lot of tips here. They're all tips to help have more cool things, more of what you want, more when you do have the leisure time, the cool stuff, you're actually able to be fully in it because you don't have things hanging over your head the same way. Or if you do have things that are coming up, you're not really worried about it. You know that you're going to be able to jump in with your 2 feet and be fully committed to the thing. I mean, most of my life, I didn't live this way. I just lived in kind of oh, fuck, what's going to happen on Monday when the work week starts again? Am I going to have enough energy? Am I going to have, shitty work? All of these things. Totally different experience. Same job, different experience. Again, pick 1 or 2 things and try them. Try them at some point over the next week or 2. If you feel like you want a better experience, if everything is going great for you, then don't worry about like trying new things. I just feel like these things have like totally transformed my experience, and they're talked about by everyone. Any type of productivity or performance, or, the leadership coaches that I see through National Speakers Association, because I've been a member since 2016, all of these people who coach like executives, they're teaching them these same things, these very same things. Entrepreneurs that get a ton done are going by these principles. If you don't want to, if this isn't you, I get it. That's fine. But if you're having a shitty experience of your work life, a place where you spend 50 or 60 hours a week, and you're not willing to put any effort into that, I'm sorry, but like, it's on you. It's on you at that point. Pick a couple things, work on them, 10 days minimum, and then reflect. How did it go? What would you tweak? Where would you go from here? These tools are absolutely what allow you to take action, to do the cool things, to create things, to grow, to evolve, the things that make us human, that make it cool to be a human, feats of engineering, great artwork, all of this fantastic creations from the human intellect into action, into spirit, into emotion, like all of these things. These are just the underlying premises that I love the quote, "Success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in, day out." Robert Collier said that in the 1800s, and he was like a self-help guru back then, and he was absolutely right. And when I say success, again, I'm not just talking about financial success. If that's what success is for you, fine. But success for people these days usually is going beyond financial. As long as you don't have huge concerns over the roof over your head and food coming into your mouth, usually people want something meaningful, fulfilling, something beyond just a paycheck. They want more meaning. And this is where it's coming from. So these are the actions that you can take to have a more successful week. And maybe it won't feel that meaningful initially, but sometimes the action comes and then the mindset begins to shift, and then new things begin to kind of pop in. And that's what I hope for anyone, that there's always like new things popping in, always the opportunity to produce, to create, to grow, to change. We can't do these things if we're overwhelmed. We can't do these things if we're in reactionary mode 100% of the time. We spend way too much time at work for it to suck. If you would like a tool that I created through the Living Blueprints brand, and Living Blueprints basically is the company where I have run workshops and do speaking events on these types of topics, I have a calendar, quote unquote, tool. It's basically the how-tos of setting up and using a calendar and ways to organize the things that you have to do, especially if you have a ton of things to do and you really want to transform the way that you're approaching them. So if you would like this, you can email me at linda@workdopepod.com. So it's linda@workdopepod.com, and put calendar in the subject, and I'm happy to send this item to you. I hope you have a fantastic, productive, creative, evolved week. Bye-bye. There you have it. Episode 3 is in the books. Not too many references in this particular episode. I did refer to the planner pad, which is the calendar, the print calendar that I use. You can find them at plannerpads.com, and they're also on Amazon. I also invited you to my calendar tool, which you can get if you email me at linda@workdopepod.com. So that's work, DOPEPOD.com. And until next time, this is Linda Stacy signing off for Work Dope. Bye-bye.